Lucille Ball was halfway through her Sunday morning at the Studio City Farmers Market when she stopped at a honey stand that nobody else had visited in the last hour. The man behind the table was reading a newspaper and did not look up when she approached. What happened in the next 20 minutes is a story about bees, about listening, and about the particular kind of loneliness that comes from knowing something deeply that nobody else has asked about. It was a Sunday in May 1968, and the farmers' market on Ventura Boulevard had been open since 7 in the morning. The market ran every Sunday from May through October in the parking lot behind the Studio City post office, 40 vendor tables arranged in loose rows, the kind of operation that draws people who care about where their food comes from and people who simply enjoy the ritual of a Sunday morning outdoors. Lucy had been coming since the market opened 3 years earlier, not every week, but often enough that the routines of it had become familiar. She arrived at 8:30, parked on the side street where there was still shade, walked the perimeter once before committing to any purchases. She was not recognized most mornings. This was partly because she wore a wide-brimmed hat and sunglasses, and partly because people at farmers markets at 8:30 on Sunday mornings are focused on tomatoes and stone fruit rather than on identifying television actresses in the vegetable aisle. And partly because Lucy had learned over 2 decades of public life how to carry herself in a way that suggested she was simply another person buying groceries, which in the specific context of a Sunday morning farmers market, she was. The honey stand was at the far end of the second row, a card table with a hand-painted sign that said Howell's Honey and 6 glass jars arranged in 2 rows of 3. The jars were uniform in size, clean, labeled by hand with the month and year of harvest. Behind the table sat a man in his early 60s, lean, weathered, wearing work clothes and a canvas apron with pockets. He had a folding chair and a newspaper and the particular stillness of someone who's been sitting for a while and is not bothered by the sitting. His name was Arthur Howell. He had been an accountant for 32 years at a firm in Glendale, had retired 18 months earlier when the firm restructured, and had taken up beekeeping in the retirement he had not particularly wanted and did not know what to do with. He kept 4 hives in his backyard in Sherman Oaks. He harvested the honey himself, bottled it in his kitchen, and sold it at the farmers market on Sunday mornings because his wife had suggested he needed something to do with his Sundays and because the money, while modest, was not nothing. He had been at the market for 6 weeks. He sold, on average, 2 jars per Sunday. This did not particularly bother him. He had not expected to sell more. He came because it gave shape to Sunday morning and because sitting behind a table with his honey and his newspaper was preferable to sitting at home with his retirement and his uncertainty about what retirement was supposed to feel like. Lucy stopped at his table at 9:15. She stood for a moment looking at the jars, then picked one up and examined the label. Arthur Howell looked up from his newspaper. $3, he said. Lucy turned the jar in her hands, holding it up to the morning light. The honey was dark amber, almost copper. "What kind of flowers?" she asked. Arthur Howell set down his newspaper. People did not usually ask what kind of flowers. They asked the price, sometimes asked if it was local, bought it or did not buy it, and moved on. "Orange blossom mostly," he said. "Some avocado. Depends on the season and what's blooming when they're foraging." Lucy set the jar down and picked up another. "This one's lighter." "Different harvest," Arthur said. "April versus June. Different flowers available." She set down the second jar and looked at him directly for the first time. "How do the bees decide which flowers to visit?" Arthur Howell had been keeping bees for 18 months. He had read 7 books on beekeeping, had joined a beekeepers' association, had spent more hours than he could count watching his hives and trying to understand the particular logic of how bees organize themselves. Nobody had asked him about it. His wife was supportive but not interested. His former colleagues were polite but clearly thought beekeeping was something retired people did when they had run out of other ideas. The people at the farmers' market bought honey or did not buy honey and did not ask how bees decided anything. He looked at the woman in the hat and sunglasses standing at his table holding a jar of his honey and asking a question that suggested she actually wanted to know the answer. "They scout," he said. "A few bees go out and find sources, then come back and do a dance that tells the others where to go. It's called a waggle dance. The pattern tells them direction and distance." Lucy set down the jar. "They have a language." "They have several," Arthur said. He was sitting forward in his chair now, the newspaper forgotten. "The waggle dance for location, different patterns for quality of the source, alarm pheromones when there's danger. It's a whole communication system." "And they all understand it?" "They're born understanding it," Arthur said. "It's not learned behavior. It's encoded." Lucy pulled out the empty folding chair on the customer side of the table, the chair that Arthur had brought as an afterthought 6 weeks ago and that nobody had sat in. She sat down. "Tell me about the alarm pheromones," she said. They talked for 20 minutes. Arthur Howell talked about bee communication, about the architecture of hives, about the specific challenges of keeping bees in a residential neighborhood in Sherman Oaks, where the Homeowners Association had opinions about agriculture in backyards. Lucy listened with the complete, unhurried attention that Arthur would later describe to his wife as the thing he remembered most clearly. Not that she asked questions, though she did, but that she listened in a way that made it clear she was actually interested in the answers, rather than simply being polite. She asked about the harvest process, about how he had learned to handle frames without disturbing the bees, about whether the bees recognized him. "I don't know if they recognize me specifically," Arthur said, "but they get used to the routine. If you move calmly and don't disrupt the patterns they've established, they tolerate you." "Like working with actors," Lucy said. Arthur looked at her. "I wouldn't know," he said. "I've never worked with actors." Lucy smiled slightly. "Same principle. Don't disrupt the patterns." At 9:35, Lucy stood. She picked up 3 jars, one of each harvest Arthur had available. "I'll take these," she said. Arthur wrapped them in newspaper and put them in a paper bag. Lucy paid with exact change. "Thank you," she said, "for the honey and for the education." "Thank you for asking," Arthur said. He said it automatically, the kind of thing you say to customers, and then realized as he said it that he meant it in a way he had not meant most automatic things he had said in the last 18 months. Lucy walked back toward the parking lot carrying her bag of honey. Arthur Howell sat down and picked up his newspaper and did not read it. A week later, Arthur found an envelope tucked under one of his honey jars when he was packing up at the end of market day. Inside was a handwritten note on plain paper and a folded newspaper clipping. The note said, "The San Fernando Valley Beekeepers Cooperative meets second Tuesday of each month, 7 p.m., Northridge Community Center. They're looking for members. Your bees are lucky. You're paying attention. LB." The newspaper clipping was a small notice from the Valley Times about the cooperative, a group of backyard beekeepers who shared resources, knowledge, and advocacy for urban beekeeping. Arthur read the note twice, standing in the parking lot with his unsold honey packed in boxes around him. He looked at the handwriting, at the initials, at the newspaper clipping that someone had taken the time to cut out and include. He went to the meeting the following Tuesday. The cooperative had 14 members, all of them backyard beekeepers with the same questions and problems and fascinations that Arthur had been working through alone for 18 months. He joined. He attended every meeting. He learned about swarm prevention and varroa mite management and the specific politics of getting the city to recognize beekeeping as legitimate urban agriculture. 3 months later, he brought a jar of honey to one of the cooperative members who had helped him reorganize his hives for better honey production. The member asked where Arthur had learned to bottle, with such clean labels. Arthur said he had been an accountant and clean labels came naturally. The member asked if Arthur would consider managing the cooperative's small treasury and record keeping. Arthur said yes. By the end of 1968, Arthur Howell was the secretary-treasurer of the San Fernando Valley Beekeepers Cooperative and was managing the administrative infrastructure that allowed 14 individual beekeepers to function as a collective. He was, by his own assessment and by the assessment of his wife, substantially less lost than he had been in the spring. He still sold honey at the farmer's market on Sundays. He sold more now, partly because he had better production techniques, and partly because he talked to people about bees in a way that made people want to hear about bees. When people asked questions, he answered them with the same attention that someone at a honey stand in May had given to his answers. He thought about that Sunday morning more often than he mentioned it. Arthur Howell sold honey at the Studio City Farmers Market for 11 years. He expanded to 8 hives, then 12. He taught beekeeping classes through the cooperative starting in 1972 and continued teaching them until 1979, when his health required him to reduce the physical work of hive management. He never told most people about the note or about who had written it. When someone at the market once asked if he had ever met anyone famous, he said he had met a woman who asked good questions about bees, and that was more interesting than famous. His wife knew the whole story. She had read the note the evening Arthur brought it home and had watched him read it 3 times at the kitchen table before saying anything. "You're going to that meeting," she had said. It was not a question. "I think I am," Arthur said. "Good," she said. "You need people who care about the same things you care about." She was right, which Arthur acknowledged then and continued to acknowledge for the next 26 years of their marriage. The note stayed in the top drawer of his desk in the study, unframed, folded in the same creases it had when he found it. He took it out occasionally over the years when something in a day reminded him of it. Lucy continued coming to the farmer's market intermittently over the years, less frequently as her schedule compressed and her work expanded, but often enough that Arthur saw her 3 or 4 times between 1968 and 1974. She stopped at his table each time. They did not discuss the note. They talked about honey production and hive health and the cooperative's advocacy work with the city. She bought honey. He wrapped it carefully. The conversations were brief and unremarkable, and exactly what they needed to be. In 1979, when Arthur's health required him to step back from active beekeeping, he donated his hives and equipment to the cooperative's educational program. The cooperative had grown to 43 members by then and had successfully lobbied the city to create an urban beekeeping permit system. Arthur attended meetings when he could and maintained the books until 1983, when he handed the treasury over to a younger member who had better handwriting and more current accounting software. He kept 1 jar of honey from his final harvest. He did not open it. It sat on a shelf in his study next to the folded note in the top drawer of his desk. His wife asked him once why he kept it. He said he liked knowing it was there. She understood this completely. If this story reminded you that paying attention to what someone cares about is sometimes the most useful thing any of us can do, subscribe, leave a comment, and hit that notification bell. More stories about who these legends really were, away from the cameras and the credits, are coming every single week.